Hi, everybody. Welcome to Pinot's Live. We are broadcasting from Glenview, Illinois. My name is Ray. I'm going to be your instructor for today. I'm going to go over our supplies and then introduce you to our painting. So behind me, I have my canvas. I'm going to be working on a 16 by 20, but feel free if you're using a different size, that's totally fine. I also have my color palette here. I have a small detail brush. It is a round style. It's okay if yours is slightly different than this. And then I also have a medium big flat brush. This will help for laying in bigger colors. And again, if you want extra brushes or if yours are slightly different sizes than mine, that's totally fine. Paint with what you are comfortable with. I also have my mixing palette here so I can make new colors. And then we have paper towels for cleaning up messes and also dabbing off our brushes for water or any of the paint that we have. So if we are ready, let's begin here. Don't forget you should probably be wearing an apron or some sort of smock. If you have paint clothes and you like to paint a lot, then you can wear those. This paint will dry fairly fast, so if you get it on your clothes, you want to wash it out. That's just some water, some soap, or you have new paint clothes, and then you can paint in them constantly, right? But don't feel too pressured to be exactly like my painting. Everyone's painting will be a little bit customized. Feel free to add in your own colors, make it your own, and be creative with it. This is all about having fun, all right? So starting off, I am going to paint my outline of my person here on the left-hand side. If you have chalk or a pencil that you're more comfortable with, totally use that. What I'm going to do, and if you want to follow along, that's great. I'm going to take my mixing palette here and dab in some black and water it down as well. This is going to help me just have a nice, thin, sort of translucent outline that I can kind of sketch in the person and the owl. Just kind of mix it in there. And then I am going to use my hand as a measuring device. So think about the top of our of the head of our person is going to be maybe 4 or 5 fingers down from the top here. Now my hand might be bigger than yours, so maybe just compensate how you feel you want to have your person placed here. So I'm going to come right about here and just really lightly sketch in. Doesn't have to be perfect, right? So we're just going to play around with our shapes and get in our scarf. My scarf is going to be just slightly smaller than the head portion because you don't want it to be too thick. We're going to paint the scarf that comes down here. It's not going to be a perfectly straight line. It's going to be a little bit wobbly. It is fabric that we're trying to portray here. So it's okay if your lines are a little bit jaggedy. It does need to be a little bit smooth. And whatever shape you do on this side, you want to kind of mimic the same shape with this one here. So if this one comes out, you also want this one to kind of follow that same wave. If you think about it kind of like a wave that goes up and down. So still using the same mixture. I didn't have a lot, but the water helped me to kind of move it around a little bit more. We're going to go with our arm that comes out here. I want to have it just slightly below the center of my canvas so that the owl can take up most of the space on top. So if I think about halfway down my canvas is right here, then my arm is going to stay right below that line. I'm going to make a nice soft curve that connects from here all the way, just about, leave about 4 or like a hand's width from the side. You don't want to have it all the way to the edge of your canvas. And then down here is going to be the rest of the body of your person. Have a little bit of that connection for the sleeve. And so far we have a person, right? So now we're going to move on to our owl. I'm going to make my owl about a hand spread width. So depending on your size of canvas, on your preference of owl size, if you do want a smaller owl, that's fine. Make sure you just have a smaller circle. Mine's going to be a pretty big owl. I do like owls here. So thinking about where each of those placements is going to be, I'm going to take my brush in my hand and just make little spots beside my fingers to see where that outline can be. We want to kind of stay within them. You don't want it to be too outrageous. And this is, again, just your sketch. We're going to paint all around this and kind of cover up any mistakes you may feel you made. Again, this is just for our beginning, our sketch. Nothing has to be perfect ever in this stage. All right, so our first color mixture, actually, we're going to move on to that. So I'm going to switch from my small brush to my big brush, or my medium brush, however you want to classify it. With my mixing palette still, I'm going to use 3 scoops of whites. 1, 2, and 3, and I'm just picking up the paint with my brush as if it was a spoon almost. So 3 scoops of white and 1 scoop of whatever blue you have. If you want a different color background, follow the same suit of 3 scoops of white if you want to keep it light and kind of pastel-y. If you want a darker background, that's okay too. It's going to make us a nice light blue mixture. I'm going to kind of just like scoop it back and forth, push it around, but don't paint your plate, your palette here. That will just paint your plate. You don't want to do that. You want to make sure you save enough paint for your canvas. All right, so once you're good, I'm going to take this light blue mixture and start painting in my background. I'm going to kind of follow along for the shapes from my sketches. I'm going to paint right on top of the lines that I made for my owl, because our owl is going to have a lot of fluff that comes out. Excuse me. Our owl will have fluff that comes out, like the little feathers and stuff like that, is going to help expand our owl. So painting right up against that line, kind of covering it up, will help you make a slightly smaller shape to then eventually use that fluff to kind of make it a little bit bigger. It's all about the layers and adding in lots and lots of texture for specifically the owl. So go ahead, paint in all of that background all the way around your sketch. Don't forget to also fill in the edges of your canvas. So like on this side, on the top, and on the bottom. This will help in the end your canvas to look a little bit more professional. So painting those edges now will save you from having to remake that color later on. And I'm almost out of this color. And if you have to mix it again, that should be on your screen, but it's 3 scoops of white and 1 scoop of blue. And it's okay if your color's not fully mixed. You can see some of mine has some streaks in it. That just adds some texture, some character to your background. Everyone is allowed to kind of create their own here. So yours can always be slightly different than mine. Doesn't have to look exactly the same. I think that's my favorite part about painting, actually, is getting to see the creativity from each person and how they customize and make unique their own painting. So see, I did run out of blue here. Maybe my scoops weren't big enough. Maybe yours were too big and you have a lot of paint left over. That's okay too. I'm going to do the same mixture, 3 white and 1 blue, but I'm going to make just slightly smaller scoops this time. That way I'm not making too much, but I have just enough to cover my background. Again, just kind of lightly scooping up my paint and mushing it back down. This is going to help me keep all of the paint together without painting the plate itself. It should match up almost the exact same. If not, you can always streak it back into your previous color mixture. Make sure I get all those edges. And you can see some of my blue has picked up a little bit of that black sketch line, and that's totally fine. We are going to add in a little bit of texture to this background, but that just adds some character to it. I'm just kind of making sure I see all these little spots here. You don't want to see canvas through your blue. All right, so now that I'm done painting my blue, I'm going to go ahead and put that into my cup. A good washing your brush technique is to kind of scrub the bottom of your cup with your brush. That's going to help push all the paint out, and it'll kind of spread the bristles around, the little hairs, and make sure all that paint's going away. Just dab it on your paper towel. All right. So we're going to base in our owl next. Now my owl is going to be a base of gray. If you would like a different color, feel free to play around with it. I have seen pink owls before, or purple owls. Not in real life, but in paintings. All right, so I'm going to use my handy mixing plate here. It's going to be a mix of 2 white, and a little touch of black. So what I did is just dipped my paintbrush into the black. I didn't really scoop it, I just dipped it. And I'm going to put that right into the 2 scoops of white that I had and mix those two together. And then you get kind of a really nice light gray. All right, so with this light gray, I'm going to fill in the body of my owl. I'm going to try and keep right up to that blue line and just fill all the way in. And then we're going to add a little bit of texture to the outside as soon as you fill in that center. All right. So you can see mine kind of like picked up a little bit of blue, but that's all right. It'll just add in some character as always. So I have a little bit of my gray mixture left over. I'm going to bring in just another tiny touch of white and tiny touch of black just to kind of freshen up what color that I have and make a slightly darker version. So you do an equal touch of white, equal touch of black. And you can pick up any of these colors. It's just to make sure you have enough paint on your brush. We are going to do little flicking motions, or like little bitty feathery technique here. Start about here, if you can kind of see that line. It's just for reference. I'm going to make all my little flicks. I'm using the flat end of my brush. It's okay if yours is slightly different, but this is what I'm doing. I'm going to flick off the edge of my owl. I'm going to kind of flick downwards and then also flick outwards to create a little bit of fluff. And that's going to help make that little fuzzy, feathery edge of our owl. And it's okay if you go a little bit outward. You can kind of help shape your owl this way. And then on the top, the owl kind of has these little ears that go out. They almost, to me, look like eyebrows. So that's what gets me, is they always kind of look like eyebrows. And so all owls, to me, look a little bit angry. They just have crazy eyebrow ears. It's fine. All right. So once you do that, you can just kind of blend in with little bitty strokes back and forth. Make sure you don't have too harsh of a line. You want a nice little soft texture between your owl color and your background color. Just those little bitty flecks. And the lighter you touch your canvas, the easier that technique works. So the softer your brush moves across the canvas, the softer those feathers look. And you just move that all the way down here. All right. So now we're going to let that dry for a little bit. I'm going to go ahead and wash out my big brush. Get rid of all of that gray color. Oof. All right, so we are going to color in the scarf right here. We're going to base it in a yellow-white mixture. So using my mixing plate, I do have some room left down right here. I am going to do just yellow. Oop. I might put in, if you feel it's a little bit too light for your canvas, if it's a little too translucent, all yellows are slightly different. Sometimes I like to add in just a dab of white to help make that yellow a little bit more thick. White tends to be a lot better at covering colors. So just go ahead and lay in your yellow for your scarf. If you're doing a different color for your scarf, go ahead and lay that base color in. I'm starting with the lightest color so that then we can put a darker color stripe or pattern on top of it. I've seen polka dot scarves. I've seen people put flowers on their scarves. It's completely up to you to be able to kind of customize that for yourself. So whatever lightest color you want your scarf to be, that's what you should start with. So I'm going to fill in all of this yellow right around here. You can see just a little bit of my black outline, but that's totally fine because we're going to outline the yellow after all of this is dry anyways. So let's get all of that in there. Just up and down. This is a really good use of your big brush because it helps to move a lot of paint very quickly. It's okay if you get a little bit outside your lines. We will clean it up with some outlines and some detail lines later. All right, and then also don't forget you do have the sides of your canvas. So I'm going to go ahead and just make a little bit of yellow there. I'm going to pick my canvas towards the side and do my little bit of yellow underneath. And again, that just helps to make it look a little bit more professional. I do know some people that also like to just paint the edges of their canvas black. That's also a really good way to kind of make it look finished and professional as well. All right, so we're going to let this yellow or your lightest color dry. That is going to dry. So letting all of this set, we can go ahead and add in the robe colors. I'm going to be using black. Feel free to add in any colors you would like. I will be washing out my big brush again. Our little brush is going to be a lot later on for all those lovely little details. And I'm just going to use straight black to cover in my robe. Just scoop it up. Oop. Maybe not as messy as I did, but that's okay. I'm going to help readjust my yellow scarf shape. Really get into the sides of it. It's going to really help create that little bit of fabric wave to it. Black can also be a really powerful color and kind of overtake anything. So always go around your edges really slowly because you don't want it to take over your lighter color. If you feel you have difficulty keeping that nice crisp line against the edge of your lighter color, feel free to get your smaller brush, kind of outline it a little bit, and then you can fill in the middle part of it with your big brush. And again, this is just me. I like using the black color for the robes, but you're always able to customize this. That's such a fun part of painting, is you get to really come alive in your painting, make it you. Or if you're painting for somebody else, you can always make it for somebody else as well and kind of put their personality or how you see their personality into a painting. I'm going to paint right up underneath my owl. It's okay if you cover up a few of those little owl feathers. We're going to be putting more texture on top of the owl in a second. It's all about layering, letting some colors dry. Oh, excuse me. And then coming back with those details. You know what I would love is while you're painting, or maybe after you're done painting, you can always show us what you've painted. Show us how you customize your painting. What colors did you use? What techniques did you like to implement into your scarf? Like, did you use different patterns? Show us on our Facebook or our Instagram. It's always so nice to see your paintings and how you get to customize and make it your own. All right, so now I'm going to let my robes dry, and I may come back in with some little detail brush and kind of clean up a little bit of this outline. I can kind of see some of my canvas through it, so I'm going to make sure that I get it nice and covered up, making sure I don't see any of my canvas through my painting. If you are using a lighter color, you may see some of those streaks or some of those brush strokes. That's totally okay. Some colors just need 2 coats or 3 coats. The color I'm using is just very powerful, and so it covers all in one step. You can kind of see what I'm doing here. I'm just resting my pinky on the canvas to help really drag a straight, clean line, and that just little tip for you. It just kind of helps create those nice, crisp, straight lines. All right, I'm going to wash out my small brush. Our next order of business is going to be the hair color right here. Now, I'm going to use a brown hair color, but you are absolutely welcome to mix it up. If you're blonde, you can have blonde hair. If you have really colorful hair, you can do that. Or if you wish to have colorful hair, you can also put in that. I used to have pink hair. I kind of miss my pink hair, actually. I might be going back to pink. Anyways, so I'm going to use a brown. I do have a brown on my palette, but if you want to mix a brown, that's totally okay too. Wash out all this black from my brush. Ooh. Ooh. My palette is a little soft right now because it's been sitting. So make sure if you do have one of these palettes right here, maybe an extra plate or just a full hand underneath it's going to help you keep control of it. I'm going to go ahead and just dip into the brown that I have on my palette and fill in the first layer of color for the hair. Now I'm just going to go right around this kind of oval-y shape. Right around the edges. You can see my brush strokes, but these brush strokes are totally okay. It's going to get a few layers on it. I'm also going to get the top and the side where it touches. Make sure I fill those in. I'm going to just kind of paint all over first, and then I'm going to go back with intentional brush strokes to help it look more like hair. Just like we did with our owl. we outlined and filled it in first, and then we took some techniques to it to make it look more like a texture and more like a 3D element. All right, so now that I've filled it in, I'm just going to kind of brush in the direction that hair is going to go. So your hair tends to grow downwards like this. And in that same little flicky technique that we used here on the owl, you can do that on the sides of your hair. And again, you can kind of see some of those brush strokes coming through. That's totally fine. We're going to clean bits of that up later. That's just going to help make it look a lot more like hair. Like I said, some colors just need 2 coats. That's okay. All right, my hands got paint on them. All right, I think our owl is ready for some more details. So I'm going to start with my smaller brush. It is a small round. Again, if yours is a flat or if it's a different shape, that's okay. We just want to really be able to kind of sketch in some of these lines. We're going to start with the eyes and give our owl some little lighter feathers to help create the dimension of it. So on my lovely mixing plate, I'm going to go back to, not put my hand in the yellow, I'm going to go back to our gray color that we already mixed. Mine's still a little bit damp, but that's okay. We want to mix right on top of that. If you would prefer not to do that, you can mix anywhere you want to. So that mixture was white and gray. We're not making the same one, so it's okay. I'm just going to make in a similar and a little bit lighter. So I just did 3 scoops of white and a touch of black. And that makes almost the exact color. I think that was our mix actually. Yeah, there you go. So if you want it lighter, just add in more white. If you don't want it as light, or if you're using a different color scheme, then that's totally fine too. I would suggest going with a light color. The light color is going to help us highlight everything and create our eyes and our highlighted feathers. So looking at our owl here, we're going to kind of find the center. See, that doesn't show up very well, so I'm going to use a little bit more white. Make sure you can see it over there. So find kind of the center of your owl, just that, excuse me, that little bitty dot right there, just so I can have a reference. My beak of my owl is going to come down to this point. So I'm going to make a little teardrop shape right there. Just outlining, just kind of sketching in what I want it to be. My beak right here. It's not too tall. It's maybe just the width and height of my thumb, the first digit. Make sure I can see that. And then our eyes are going to be almost perfect circles right above it. So if you think about, there's an invisible line at the top of our beak. I'm going to go ahead and make little under eyes, and I'm going to create a circle right on top of that. And it wants to be about the same height as you made your beak. So kind of keep the dimensions and the measurements similar, unless you do want a very tiny beak and really, really big owl eyes. I think the hardest part that any artist is going to struggle with is getting both eyes to be the same size and shape. That is one of the biggest problems that literally every artist I've ever encountered has issues with. So if you also have issues with that, you are just a real artist. Every real artist feels that they can't draw eyes at the same shape. So never worry about that. You are your own individual there. So now that I have this all sketched out, I'm going to take this light mixture. It's mostly just white, little bit of that gray or a tiny, tiny bit of black. Yours can be a little bit lighter or a little bit darker than mine. I just really want to add in these light, feathery pieces. So with this small brush, whether it's a little bit smaller or bigger, You just want to do really soft flicks of your brush, and you want to flick in the direction that you think it's going to grow. So if you kind of think about this is your center, the eyes and the beak, have them flick outwards from those shapes. And I'm holding my brush kind of far back. So you can see here on camera, I'm holding my brush fairly far back. If you have a shorter brush, just hold it towards the end of it. And this is going to help you softly touch your canvas. It's going to make you feel a little bit dainty with it. Be very gentle and careful with your brush. It's going to help make those really nice, fine little lines. And it makes them look like really soft, tiny feathers. And just kind of follow the outside of the eyes. See, some of them are kind of lighter, some of them are softer on the canvas, so it doesn't show up as much, and some of them show up really well. That's perfect because you want all of these feathers to be individual. You don't want it to just be a block of color. You want them to show up at different line weights, different thicknesses. Just these tiny little lines. I'm going right between kind of the eyebrow-ish shape right here. These tiny little lines help create that texture. And if you feel your paint isn't quite flowing on your canvas as you like it, I like to just pick up my water, and my water's a little bit dirty, but that's okay. It's just going to help add kind of a dingy white. It'll help make your paint move a little bit easier. It kind of makes it look like milk, but don't eat or drink this because it's not milk. But it helps it to flow just a little bit better from your brush. If your paint's too dry, it doesn't want to leave your brush. You add in just a little bit of water, and it's perfect. So do lots of these little bitty lines, these little bitty feathers, all the way down. And you see when I'm on this side of the owl, it follows this direction. When I'm on this side of the owl, it also follows that direction. So it's kind of like parentheses. And then when you get to the middle, you just keep them straight up and down. But then as you move to the side, start to curve them a little bit more. That's going to help make your owl look very fluffy and really three-dimensional. So you kind of start at this wide angle on the sides. Oop, and then you also do these tiny little straight ones in the middle. It also helps sometimes if you just keep turning your hand when you're painting. So I like to, if I'm painting on this side, I kind of paint this direction with my hand going at this angle, or over here I can do the same thing. It just helps to change the shape of the little line that you're making. So each time you do, like, count out 5, right? You can count any number, but I'm going to count out 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I'm going to pick up new paint and then switch the way I'm holding my brush. I can also turn it back and forth like this. I'm going to do 1, 2, 3, change. 1, 2, 3. So 3 actually works better for me, but that just helps you make all these tiny different little feather strokes. It really helps to bring it unique and individual for you. And these little feathers, when you get to the bottom here, they can really go over, not too much, but they can overlap the sleeve of the person holding it. This way it makes it look like the owl is actually perched on top of the sleeve. Ooh. It's okay if a few of them get a little crazy down there. We're also going to add in some talons or claws once we kind of figure out this highlight right here. So now that I've got mine fairly filled in, I'm going to pick up the black from my palette and I'm going to outline where my feet are going to go. I just used my dirty brush that already had white on it. I'm going to pick up a little bit of black on the edges. And our feet are going to be right here in the middle and the bottom. They can be touching in the middle or they can be slightly spread apart. Excuse me. I get the hiccups when I'm on camera. What can I say? So I'm going to do these 3 little teardrop shapes. And it's very similar to the shape of the beak. So you do that one in the middle. It's a little hard to tell since it's black on black there. I'll outline that in gray when I do this actually. But the first middle one, you do that same teardrop shape. I'll do gray here so you can see it. See that shape that comes right down into the sleeve? That's the first teardrop shape, just like your beak. And then the other 2 kind of like makes a heart off to the side. But you want to do that on both sides. And this is the shape of the claws, or if you know the technical term, they're called talons. Or feet. You can also just call them the owl's feet. It's also appropriate. So now we have 2 little feet here. I am going to rinse out my small brush and fill those in with a yellow. We will have to do this a few little layers, but that's okay. Some birds actually have really dark claws or feet. Some of them are brown, some of them are black. I'm going to use yellow just because it's nice and complements the scarf. And it's okay that your gray is still kind of wet, or if your black is still kind of wet. We're going to go over this several times throughout the painting to really get them in there. But this is kind of a natural way of blending, is just putting wet paint on top of wet paint. And it helps blend this yellow into that black and into that gray, and it makes it more of a natural yellow and not so bright. But again, you are welcome to use a brown. I've seen some people do like a light brown where you do brown and white. You can also make it a lighter yellow and add in some white as well. And we'll go over those again, so don't worry if it's not quite to your pleasing there. All right, I'm gonna clean up my brush. And then I am going to pick up my palette again and move some of my black around with a little bit of water that's still on my brush. I did just dip it in twice, 3 times, that's totally fine. You just want to mix a little bit of water in with your black. And we're going to do some of our feathers on our owl here, as well as our eyes and beak. Again, if you are following a different color palette, just pick a darker shade to your overall owl and then fill in that same technique, but not as much. I'll show you here in a second. I'm going to go ahead and fill in the eyes. Nice little outline. And then I'm going to fully fill it in. Owls have these really interesting big eyes. They can see so many things. They can see so far in the night. It's crazy. I used to watch a lot of Animal Planet and like nature documentaries, and I thought owls were so cool. Oop, look at that. We have 2 big eyes. And then you can go right to your beak. And this is a good chance if you feel your beak was too big or too small. This is kind of like the permanent beak shape right here. So fill that in however you see fit. I'm going to keep mine a very similar size that I had it at. And it mixed a little bit with the white outline that I had, but that's okay. It'll just kind of add in some dimension to it. Now with this black, a little bit of water in it again, don't forget that. Makes it nice and easier to move. I'm going to paint in those little bitty feather strokes on the owl. Doesn't have to be everywhere, just in a few places. And always paint them outwards, so never from the outside in, always from the inside out, to really make them look like they're growing out of the owl. And this is just to help make the owl look more three-dimensional, more real, all that fluffy featherage that's going on. And then right around the eyes of the owl as well tends to be a little bit darker. So you can kind of take your black, or if you're using a different color, whatever your dark color is, and kind of feather out from your eyes in very short little bitty strokes. This will make the eyes look like they're really set back inside the feathers. It kind of starts off looking like eyelashes, but the more texture you add into your owl, the more it'll look like your feathers. And some of these will be short, some of these will be long. You just want them all around, short little strokes around your eyes. And I like to just, when my paint starts to run out on my brush, I like to make longer strokes throughout the body, just so I can get rid of some of that paint, but it also makes really interesting textures and lines because it's almost running out. And that really helps just to create that unique texture itself. So I'm just painting all around the eyes here. And then later we're going to put in the highlight, which is very moon-like, which I think is really cool if you think about the moon is always out when the owls are out, so you put the moon in the owl's eyes. I think it's kind of cute. I'm just taking my black all the way around the owl eyes. It does look a little creepy right now. That's totally okay. It gets a lot better once you start putting in those highlights to the eyes, into the beak later on. Just adding in all that texture, because you do want the black of the eye to dry before you put in any of that highlight, because if not, it'll just turn gray. Whereas if you let it dry a little bit, then you can put white directly on top of it and it looks like a really shiny highlight. And so I'm taking this black, same little stroke texture all through my owl, but I'm not doing as much as I did with my white highlight. So this is technically our shadow feather right here. I'm not doing as much as I did with my white because I want it to still look lighter overall. The more shadow that you put in, the darker overall that your owl will look. And if you want a darker owl, definitely go for that. But if you want a lighter owl, then you want more highlight over your shadow. While I also have my black, I'm going to go ahead and outline and clean up some of my claw down here. My little feetsies of my owl. That'll help make them look a little bit more dimensional. Right around the edges. Just like that. All right, so once you feel that you've got a really good mixture of your shadow there, I'm going to go back to, got paint on my hands. I'm going to go back to our second mixture that we had, so that original gray color, the second mixture. I'm going to wash off my brush just a little bit to kind of freshen it up. And I'm going to take those 2 scoops. If you already have gray, perfect, use that. Those 2 scoops white, 1 scoop black, or just a touch of black to freshen up my gray here. I'm going to take that same gray and go right back through some of my black ones. It's going to mix right with them. So if you feel you had maybe a really harsh line, you can always just add in that extra layer. It helps to really blend and to create that shape of your owl. And even after this little instruction here, we move on to other things. You can always come back to your owl, because I feel when you have a texture like this, you could probably paint at it forever and never feel satisfied, but that's okay. I think every artist feels that at some point. So you just paint around them, make it a little bit softer on some, and it really helps just blend and make your owl very special for you. So I'm going to wash this out. My eyes are not quite dry yet, so I'm going to move on to the stripes of my scarf. The stripes of my scarf are going to be, where are those? I think it's just red. The red I have is a fairly dark red. If yours is too light, you can always draw in. We do have red and a touch of black, thank you. If you want your red darker, so you do a scoop of red and a small scoop or touch of black. It just helps create kind of a darker color. Really nicely complements the bright yellow that you have. So I'm going to wash off my big brush, bring in that scoop of red onto my mixing palette, and just to dip into my black. So I'm going to use my big brush because I want the stripes, excuse me, I want the stripes to be the same width as this brush. If your brush is slightly different, or if you're doing a different technique or pattern, then use whatever brush is going to make that shape best for you. So with my big brush here, I'm just going to create my stripes, and I want them to follow the opposite direction of my scarf. So my scarf goes this way, I want my stripes to go this way, right? So starting at the top here, leaving a little yellow peeking off the top, going to create my stripes. So there we have one. I'm going to try and evenly space, so the width of my brush, I'm going to try and keep that width that I'm skipping for my yellow. Don't need too much paint on your brush. And you can see I'm dragging the brush both directions. So I'm using the brush fairly close up because I'm doing fine work. It's not too loosey-goosey like the owl up here. It's very precise almost. So I'm picking up a little bit of paint, I'm holding it close to the bristles, and I'm going to place my brush on one end of the scarf and pull it the other direction. I'm not going to go all the way to the edge because I then want to switch my brush and pull it the opposite way. And that way I'm getting right up to the line where the yellow meets the black, and I'm not going too far over. If you do go a little over though, that's all right. You can always cover it up with your black or your darker color. We're also going to outline this, and so it'll help clean up any of those lines. But it really does help to switch the way you hold your brush with each new technique. So pulling it one direction, switching the way you hold it, and pulling it the next direction. It's really going to help make a nice crisp line. Try and keep them so it follows the curve of your scarf. Right back and forth. All right, so now I'm going to move on to the neck part of the scarf. And same technique, hold it one direction, place and pull, and then flip it to pull from the other direction. And do this however many stripes or however many flowers or polka dots, any that you want. And the more you do this, the faster you get. All right, so now we have all of our stripes. I'm going to go ahead and wash out my brush. Ooh. Make sure that's nice and clean. I think the owl eyes are nice and dry, so we can add in those highlights. I'm going to add in my yellow moon shape to the eye of the owl. If you want to add in a different shape or a different color for the highlight, feel free to do so. I would love to know what you chose. So I'm going to paint it white first so that I have a lighter color to start with. So just with my slightly damp brush, I'm going to pick up the white and make a little moon crescent shape. So not at the very edge of the eye, but just a little bit inside of it. Going to make my little crescent, which is kind of the shape of a smile if you think about it. Look at that right there. Already looking less creepy in the eyes. So I'm starting at like the top of the shape and pulling it down, and just like we did with the stripes here, I start at the top, pull it down, and I switch my brush and pull it the other direction as well. It really does help to think about how you hold your brush and where you place it. It really helps change the shape and the way that it creates those lines. So now that I have my two little crescent shapes, I'm also going to pick up a little extra paint on my brush, just on the very end of it, and make two little dots. This really helps create that nice little highlight, very cartoony, but it's really cute and it really helps bring out the shape. And then after this white dries, we will add in yellow, or if you want a different color, feel free to do that. Since I have white on my brush, I'm going to also do little highlight on the beak. So I'm doing like a little soft short line on top and a longer line on bottom to help make it look a little bit more three-dimensional. So because I put the highlights on the left side of the eyes here, I also want that same highlight on the left side of the beak to keep the light source the same direction. Now, let's go to our hair again and get that second coat on. You want to keep your big brush, your medium brush, with the same direction that you painted last time. So picking up the brown that I had, I'm going to paint with up and down strokes and just fill in where you could see some of the canvas through it. Being careful not to get too much into the stripes of my scarf. Don't want that to bleed into the hair. All right, so now we have a second coat on that. We're going to do some highlights on our robe here. So because my robe is very dark, I'm going to use a white to highlight it. Make sure my small brush is clean. I'm also going to make sure I have a little bit of water on my brush when I dip it into my white. I want to make sure that it's going to flow really easily, and it's okay to make that color a little bit more see-through or translucent. So with that kind of milky consistency, I'm going to create some highlight lines here. Now these are going to be very abstract in a sense. You can interpret these lines in a variety of ways. So I want mine to kind of follow the way the fabric might fall and or fold. So I know that like the top might have a highlight, the break where the body meets the arm might have one. It's kind of nice to kind of outline the connection that your scarf has with the robe here. I'm also going to get little outliney, but not too much. Be very loose with it around the edges of your robe. Feel free to play with the way that you hold your brush to the canvas. Really soft, quick strokes. And this will just help create, excuse me, create some of those folds that the robe may have. That just helps kind of make it some dimensions there. And then if you feel, my white's dry, so let's try that. With the white still on my brush, I'm just going to go ahead and pick up yellow and go right on top of the white crescents that I made. Make that really shine. And the same technique, pulling it from both directions. There we go. And now since I have my yellow, I'll probably also go down and just do another coat here on the claws. That's what's nice about having similar colors across your canvas. Always just go in and touch up a color elsewhere if you ever have like a little mistake somewhere. Just like that. All right, this is coming together really nicely. I'm going to rinse out my small brush and start using my black as an outline. So rinsing off my detail brush here. I'm going to use my mixing palette for this. I'm going to bring in a few scoops of black and just dip in some water so it's really nice and thin. So I did 3 black and 2 little drops of water. Makes it nice and thin so that I can start outlining some stuff. So if you need to like touch up here on your claws, you can. Any little mishaps. I can use this color to also start shaping up the hair of my person here as well. So I'm going to go ahead and outline the outside, and then we're going to make little flick marks just like our owl to create a hair texture. So starting at the top here. Again, I'm moving the way I hold my brush. See what's more comfortable for you. I'm pulling in both directions to create these little hairs. And you can go both directions for this one, I think, because you're really just trying to outline and create a boundary for this hair. Because this is kind of a cartoony painting, so it's allowed to have outlines. You're also allowed to paint outside of the lines. I think that's my favorite part, is finally getting to paint outside the lines. So I'm using the same technique I did for the owl, but in shorter strokes, and I'm keeping them really close together. So the owl was spread apart. The hair is going to be closer together here. I'm holding my brush about halfway, and I'm lightly touching the canvas from the bottom up. But then you're also welcome to pull it down if that's more comfortable to you. Just want to create these little hair strokes, little hairs on the bottom where your hair connects to your scarf. Some of these will go higher, some of them will go lower. The brown in my hair is still wet actually, so it helps blend it too. That way it's not just a solid black line, it kind of blends into that brown. And then while I still have it on there, I'm going to run a few streaks through the bigger portion of the hair to create that the hair is kind of all over and not just at the bottom there. Just a few light-handed strokes, just like that. Now I'm going to move on to outlining my scarf and giving it some dimension. So starting here at the top right where the hair was connected to it, I'm going to lay my brush right on top of it and create some not too thick outlines, but a really nice bold outline for it. And it'll really help to create that shape and make it nice and crisp. It'll help you clean up some lines down here if it comes down too far. Just like that. All right. And then also through the body of your scarf, if your lines are dry, mine are fairly dry here. You can also do a second coat if you want to. I'm going to move on to kind of the shape of the fabric, similar to how we have some of these falling lines or these highlights here on the robe. I'm going to make it go through the scarf so it looks like it kind of has some folds to it. It gives it some dimension, makes it look a little bit more realistic while still being a little cartoony. It's nice to have some of your lines go off the edge too. Makes it look like there's a bigger picture and this is just a small window of it. And your lines don't have to be the same width from the start to the finish. They can get a little bit bigger, they can get thinner. It'll really create that realistic look, or at least that fold look of fabric. Gonna go over this top one, really emphasize that line. Let's get some of these fold lines right in here. Your fold lines can also go right off of your scarf into your robe. If your robe isn't black, feel free to let those lines go right into the side. You don't need too many of these, just enough to make it look like fabric. All right. When you feel comfortable with that, go ahead and wash your brush. Just helps freshen it up. I'm going to touch up anywhere that I accidentally placed my hand when it had paint on it. But that is pretty good for your scarf and your robe there. I'm also going to take my small brush, clean it out, pick up a little bit of white to highlight the hair. You just want a few of those lines, just like you did with the black. Highlight a few of them, makes it look more 3D. All right, and then we're going to put our lovely little mail envelope right here. The letter that you received from this mysterious owl. I'll wash out my detail brush. And I'm going to use a slightly watered down black, similar to before, just to outline it, kind of sketch it in. You are welcome to use chalk or a pencil. Now our envelope's going to be a little bit sideways here. I'm going to start about halfway through my beak, create the top line here. So a shorter line on the left side and a longer line on the right side. That's the top of my envelope. And then bring that rectangle down. You don't want your envelope to be too big. You don't want it to take up your whole owl. So you need to work really hard on getting those lovely textures for your owl. Just kind of get your outline there. I'm going to go ahead and at least know where I kind of want my envelope top to be. But then we're going to mix a color for the actual color of the envelope itself. And that is going to be our fourth color mixture. Let's see, I'm going to use my big brush to scoop, but then my little brush to paint with. So I'm going to do a dip into my gold color. If you don't have gold, that's all right. Just kind of helps make it a little shimmery. Touch of gold, touch of yellow, and then a nice scoop of white. So I'm going to mix that color together. Gonna give us a nice off-white. Make sure it's all mixed together. And then I am going to use my detail brush. It's still a little bit dirty, but that's all right. To fill in the space just a little bit. It's okay if it mixes with some of your outline. This will help me control where it goes in relation to the beak. Doesn't get too out of control. If you feel more comfortable with your big brush, please go ahead and use your big brush to fill in. This color should cover a good amount. You can see it kind of mixes with some of my black outline, and it's got a really nice kind of, not ancient, but like an old envelope feel to it. It feels magical, right? That is the title of our painting, Some Magical Mail. And if you want your envelope to be a different color, I've seen all varieties. Sometimes it helps to do a few coats, but this is covering pretty well. Use all my paint, fill it in. For me, I think using the smaller brush helps to make it look a little bit more aged. Kind of gives you that little marbly effect, so it's not all the same color. It's got a little bit of age to it. And then feel free, you can always streak in a little bit more gold. You can streak in more white. It'll really help create the differences in that color. Make it a little bit unique for yourself. If it's too wet, it may not pick up too well. It may blend too much. Just let it dry a little bit. You can also use a hair dryer if you want to speed up the drying process. But look at that, we have an envelope. And then if you want, you can re-outline it. Gonna rinse out the white and the gold here. Just touch up some of that outline. Make it nice and crisp. And then our next and final step, next step, not final step, we have one more after this, is to seal our envelope. And I'm going to seal my envelope with a red wax seal. So washing out my big brush here. You can also use a small one if you're more comfortable with that. I'm just going to dip in to the dark red that we had earlier. If yours is dry, that's okay. It's just 2 scoops of red and a touch of black. I'm going to place it right in the middle and just kind of twist my brush right there in a circle. It does not need to be a perfect circle. You just want to make kind of a circly shape here. This is going to help create what that shape is, because it is a wax seal. And if you don't know what a wax seal is, it's just where you melt some wax and you pour it into the center of your envelope to seal it. It's a very fancy way of sealing envelopes, but it's also kind of fun. You get to customize them. You can always take in a little bit of black as well and just outline it, or you can put a little shape inside of it. Doesn't have to be a perfect outline. Just a little shape or dimension to it will help. We are getting really close here. I think our last little bit is going to be a little spatter on top. You don't have to do this portion if you don't want to, but this is a fun way to kind of give it some texture, give it some character. It almost kind of looks like snow also. So I'm going to use a fresh mixing plate. Ooh. Fresh mixing plate right here. And it's going to be with our big brush. It works really well with a brush that has a lot of bristles. So don't use too small of a brush. It works really well if you have a little bit more here. I'm going to really rinse this out. I'm going to pick up a little bit of white, put it on my plate, and dip it into my water, and then mix those two together. Now my water is dirty, but that's okay. It's just going to make a kind of a little bit of a dingy or dirty white, which is totally fine. And there are several ways to do this next step. It is a messy step, so if you have anything around you that you don't want to get paint on, please move it to the side, put it behind your canvas, move them far away. I'm going to show you a few different techniques of doing this. One of them is using the fresh mixing palette and kind of holding it. I kind of hold it like a taco here, like a giant taco, and I move some of the paint to the edge, and then I flick my brush towards the canvas. So what I'm doing here is flicking the paint towards the canvas off of my plate, off of my palette, and this is creating these little bitty specks or snowflakes, if you want to call them that. And you can do this with several different colors. So this first color I'll do this way. Now see, if you get a little too much, don't worry about that. You can always dab some of it off with a paper towel. If your mixture is running down your canvas, add in more paint. If it's not quite flicking correctly, then add in a little bit more water. And feel free to have a paper towel on hand. It'll help pick up any of those really thick spots or anything that's going to run down your canvas. So now I've done the white spatter. Let's us do some blue spatter. So a bit more water on my brush. I'm going to mix it right into my white. So pick up a dab of that blue, mix it into my white, kind of milky mixture here. Now I don't want too much paint sitting on my brush, so kind of wipe it or pull it off the edge of your plate or your mixing palette. And I'm going to use my thumb to pull back the bristles and let it fling towards the canvas. So just like with this, holding it back, letting it flick towards the canvas. It may be hard to see on camera right here. There's just tiny little flecks of blue. You can always add in, I'm going to add a little bit of black in mine so you can see it better, but feel free to flick or spatter on any of the colors you want to. So using my thumb, flicking forward. You can also use your pointer finger here and flicking towards the canvas. It will make your hands very messy, but it works really well. And it's a nice fine spatter across it. Again, it kind of looks like snowflakes. I'm gonna wipe my hands and then do one more technique with a different color. So now I'm gonna rinse my brush using my same mixing palette, get some water on my plate, and bring in gold. So I'm going to water down my gold. If you have a different color you want to use, go for it. So with a watered down gold here, I am going to hit my brush. Where am I here? I'm going to hit my bigger brush against my smaller brush here, and that's going to help create the right amount of friction to spatter my paint from my brush to the canvas. You want to hold really tightly. Don't let go of your brushes. Don't let them fly everywhere. But just really lightly hit it against your other brush, it may fling back a little bit at you, but this will also be a good technique to get some of the paint off of your brush. If you're like me, you might want to take off your glasses. All right, so now you've got this nice fine spattering. I used white, blue, gold. You can make yours any colors that you want to. There's so many ways that you can influence and customize this to your liking. There's so many things that you could always do to keep touching it up. You'd always add more feathers or more stripes or texture here. But that is basically our painting. If you have any questions, let us know. Don't forget, you should use a marker or your tiny paintbrush to go ahead and sign your canvas. All artists sign their canvases, so don't forget that part. You can do your name, you can do the date. Some people like to sign it on the letter or on the bottom. You can sign the back of it, but have fun with it. And let us see what creations you made. Let's see you on Instagram or Facebook. Tag us, comment so that we can see your wonderful creations. Thank you so much for painting with me today.